So, good day everyone. My name is Mananjin Obot and I will be continuing to discuss the South America and the Caribbean island by their climate. So, we will proceed to the climate itself. Where is it? There. So, so in South America's climate is dominated by relatively warm regions, yet the continent can be generally be grouped into four climatic regions, and they are the tropical, temperate, arid, dry desert, cold, or polar. In tropical zone, which include both tropical rainy and tropical wet and dry climates, cover more than half of the continent. Tropical rainy conditions occur in the Amazon River basin, the northeastern coast, and the Pacific coast of Colombia. The region's average daily temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, and some areas receive an extreme amount of precipitation, the Choco region of Colombia. Tropical wet and dry conditions occur in the Orinoco River basin, the Brazilian highlands, and a western section of Ecuador. In temperate naman, the continent's temperate climates are located south of the Tropic of Capricorn and in the mid-level elevations of the Andes Mountains. Temperate climates have a greater temperature range and lower winter temperature than tropical climates. So as well in arid zone, arid climates are found in deserts, coastal areas, and interior regions throughout South America. Some of these climates are extremely cold, while others are extremely hot, but they all receive very little precipitation, which this makes agricultural production difficult. Last is the cold zone, or the polar zone. Cold climates occur in the southern ends of Argentina and Chile, and the highest elevation of the Andes. Cold climates have an average annual temperature of below 10 degrees Celsius. These climates are characterized by long dry seasons and high winds. So in the next slide, we will see the South America's climate zone map. So makita diri nato no ang classification of the map, which is the blue color is the polar zone, the green color is the temperate zone, the yellow color is the tropical zone, and the orange color is the dry desert zone or the arid zone. So mostly makita nato no nga ang yellow is dominated mostly in the Brazil area, and it is a tropical zone, wherein makita pud nato diriya ang the green color is which is the temperate zone, wherein as well the temperate climates have a greater temperature range and lower winter temperatures than tropical climates. So makita pud diriya nato guys na the orange one, which is the arid or the desert zone, nga dominated siya mostly in, which is dominated more in Chile or in Argentina. So diri ang makita nato nganong desert zone siya is because of its orographics. We call it orographic, or the orographic effect, which occurs when air masses are forced to flow over high topography, wherein naging dry siya kay is because ang wind di siya maabot because of the block or the barrier by Andes Mountain. So makita jud nato siya nga dry siya diri ana part or desert zone siya diri. As well din nga mapansin din ninyo nganong dry pud siya sa part sa Brazil is because naging arid zone siya or naging desert zone siya kay sa part man gud sa Brazil kay na moto akong ingon because of the topographic effect nag-block ang wind caused by like sa kanina na ang coast niya is ang Andes Mountain while in sa part sa Brazil ang coast pod niya is the Brazilian Highlands. Wherein sa Brazilian Highlands nag-cover siya most of the eastern, southern, and central portion of Brazil. So, dira makita nato, makita pud nato na pud siya sa top. So, mao lang na siya ang reason because naging ano siya, naging dry siya, naging desert zone siya is because of the orographic effect. Kay wala na pas, nag-block siya, gi-block niya ang wind para makasustain siya sa inana. So, sabotable naman siya. So, ilang climate din naging nabot sila polar zone or cold zone is because the cold climates occur in the southern ends of Argentina and the part of Chile and the highest elevation because of the highest elevation of the Andes. So, naging cold na siya. Next part, nakita nato diriya ang map. Wherein diriya Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay. So diri nga part nakita jud nato ang diriya nga side nakapalibot jud ang Andes Mountain. So diriya sa part kay morning tropical zone. Diriya murag sa eastern or part kay na diriya nakabutang arid zone, diriya pud na diri sa kilid diriya jud arid zone na siya or desert zone because naka-block because of the orographic effect nag-block jud ang wind dili siya mapunta because of the highest elevation of Andes Mountain diriya kay the highest elevation of Brazilian Highlands. So next one is the biomes and vegetation of South America. And the first one is the Amazon. The Amazon is a tropical forest. It is a Amazon biome is defined as the area covered predominantly by dense moist tropical forest with relatively small inclusions of several other types of vegetation such as savannas, floodplain, forest, grasslands, swamps, bamboos, and plum forests. So, diri makita po nato sa Amazon, the plants, because of its tropical zone, many crops thrive in the tropical climates of South America. Cashews and Brazil. In cashews and Brazil, nuts are cultivated. Fruits such as avocado, pineapple, papaya, and guava are also native to tropical South America. And next one is the Patagonia. The Patagonia steppe bioregion, located in the Southern America or the Neotropical realm, incorporates most of the temperate grassland biome of South America, between the Andes Mountains to the west and the Espinal drylands to the east. The Patagonian steppe is a vast semi-arid to arid region located on the southern tip of the continent, mainly in southern Argentina but also in Chile. Patagonia is a relatively dry and temperate region, or it is a dry climate. So makita nato sa picture no nga murag uga-uga jud siya. So next. The third one is the Gran Chaco. Gran Chaco is an arid subtropical region of low forests and savannas traversed by only two permanent rivers and practically unmarked by roads or rail lines. It is bounded on the west by the Andes mountain ranges and on the east by the Paraguay and the Paraná rivers, a tropical and subtropical dry broadleaf forest. So, more similar mostly siya sa, makita natin siya mostly, makuha lang siya gamay sa Patagonia. So, the fourth one is the Atlantic Forest. The Atlantic Forest has ecoregions within the following biome categories. Na siya seasonal moist and dried broadleaf tropical forest, as well as tropical and subtropical grasslands, savannas, and shrublands and mangrove forests. So mostly similar lang po siya sa the Amazon. The last one is the rainforest. So yes. So the last is the rainforest. The rainforest, the tropical rainforest, is a hot, moist biome where it rains all year long. It is known for its dense canopies of vegetation that form three different layers. The top layer or the canopy contains giant trees that grow to heights of 75 meters or about 250 feet or more. This layer of vegetation prevents much of the sunlight from reaching the ground. Thick, woody vines are also found in the canopy. They climb trees in the canopy to reach for sunlight. The middle layer or the understory is made of vines, smaller trees and ferns and palms. Yes, palms. So the next one, makita diri nato ang map of biomes and vegetation of South America. So diri sa for me is the left side. Makita diri nato ang classification na ay green, nga army green ang color, nga na-classify siya as moist tropical forest, and the light green is the dry forest and savanna. So mostly makita nato dari ang sa part of diri makita nato mostly ang army green kay belong siya sa Colombia, napod siya sa part sa Venezuela and Brazil. Pero mostly sa Brazil kay siya dry forest and savanna. Sa right side naman makita nato diri ang sa Brazil kay na tropical and subtropical moist broadleaf forest. Parehas lang gihapon diri sa Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador. So mo na siya mostly tropical and subtropical moist broadleaf forest sila. Napud tayo more so light green or white, classified as tropical and subtropical grassland, savanna, and shrublands. Am I right or wrong? So the yellow part is the flooded grasslands and savannas. So yeah, mao lang ni siya ang data or the map that I will be presented to you. So we'll be moving to the climate of the Caribbean island. In climate of Caribbean island, the climate of the Caribbean region is tropical, somewhat moderated by the prevailing northeast trade winds. Consequently, localized climatic conditions depend strongly on elevation, ocean currents, and trade winds. Most islands experience a wet and a dry season. Annual precipitation ranges from 800 to 2,000 millimeters or 30 to 80 inches, but can reach more than 5,000 millimeters or 200 inches at the highest elevation. The wet season generally lasts from May to October, and the dry season from December to March. The relative humidity is high year-round. So, in the Caribbean island, most tropical cyclones occur in the Western Caribbean. However, they can occur throughout the most of the region by August and September. The season peaks in the Caribbean island will be in October when the ocean surface temperature is at its warmest. So, diri sa map no makita nato ang data of rainfall of the Caribbean islands. So mostly sa Caribbean island diri mag-range siya ang rainfall from 150 to 250 millimeters. So from Cuba, Cayman, Jamaica, Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, more and so on. Apil po diri ang sa Curacao, the Panama, Costa Rica, mostly diri dominated siya from ano na siya, yellow side. And next one is the biomes and vegetation of the Caribbean island. So, FYI, the Caribbean region is in the Neotropical realm. Ecoregions are classified by biome type, the major global plant communities determined by the rainfall and climate. The Caribbean islands bioregion is a biogeographic region that includes the islands of the Caribbean Sea and nearby Atlantic islands, which share a fauna, flora, and microbiota distinct from surrounding bioregions. The islands contain a mixture of dry and moist forest, both broadleaf and conifers surrounded by mangroves. So makita nato diri na we have a six biomes and vegetation of Caribbean islands. We have tropical broadleaf forest, tropical coniferous forest, the grasslands, deserts, and mangroves. So first is the tropical broadleaf forest, which characterized by low variability in annual temperature and high levels of rainfall. Forest composition is dominated by evergreen, semi-evergreen, and deciduous tree species. So makita nato ni sa part of Cuban moist forest is wherein in Cuba, the Hispaniolan moist forest, wherein in Dominican Republic, Haiti, as well as in Jamaican moist forest. It is a part of Jamaica. The next one is the tropical coniferous forest, wherein in tropical coniferous forest, it contains evergreen trees that bear cones. Elegant pine grown in this biome, along with spruce, fir, and tamarack. In much of the northern forest, the conifers mingles with deciduous trees, particularly aspen, birch, sugar maple, and basswood. Next one is the grasslands. And in grassland, it is an area where the vegetation is dominated by grasses. Like the grassland. However, sedge and rush can also be found along with variable proportions of legumes like clover and other herbs. So the next one is the desert. Wherein desert, diri na to makita probably the example of the desert of Caribbean is the Tobacco case. And the next one is the mangroves, wherein in mangrove swamps are coastal wetlands found in tropical and subtropical regions. They are characterized by halophytic or soil-loving trees, shrubs, and other plants growing in brackish to saline tidal waters. As well, in the mangrove habitats is found on river deltas that form in brackish estuaries or the riverine mangrove, as well as I said kanina. The mangroves are on interdital flats along more exposed coasts or fringing mangrove, and on the landward side of fringing mangrove where wave action and tidal influence are greatly reduced, or the basin mangrove. So the next slide is we will find the a biome or the vegetation of the Caribbean island. However, dili siya mostly kompleto sa kaning na map. So makita lang nato diri ang Jamaica, the Cuba, the Hispaniola, the Puerto Rico. So in Cuba, they are not mostly part of coniferous forest. And in Jamaica, dominantly siya mostly of moist forest, pero na siya sagol as dry forest. While in Hispaniola, na siya tulo ka buok, ay apat pala, which is the coniferous forest, the moist forest, napud siya pinakagamay nga murag na light blue dira, which is the flooded grasslands, as well as the dry forest. While in Puerto Rico, mostly dominant siya into moist forest. Napod siya gamay-gamay of shrublands probably or the dry forest. Wherein sa Cuba makita po nato dara na ay flooded grasslands, na part of flooded grasslands, na pay part of mangroves. So yes, all lang siya. And that's the end of my report of South America and the Caribbean islands, wherein their climates is been discussed, as well as the biomes and their vegetation. So thank you and God bless.
Good day, everyone. I am Renz Marian and Rosalio, a member of Group 2. And since we've already talked about these physical geography, now let's move on to the human geography and economics, covering the Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, Spanish speaking South America, and Brazil. My part, I'll be just discussing to you the human geography, and Trisha, which is my partner, will discuss the economics. And now let's first talk about Mexico. Mexico is actually a country located in the southern part of North America, and it's the third largest country in Latin America. Now, its human geography, it is actually shaped by their rich history and diverse culture, as well as various social, economic, and political factors. Now, let's move on to its population. Now, Mexico has a population of around 132 million people, making it the most populous Spanish speaking country in the world. Now, the population is predominantly urban, which is a region where more than 80% of the population live in urban clusters. Now, based on my research, around 80% of people living in cities, particularly in the central and northern regions of the country. That's why the population there is predominantly urban. Now let's move on to the ethnicity. Now, the majority of the population is actually mestizo, which is a mixed indigenous and European heritage. Now, although there are also significant indigenous and Afro-Mexican population. Now, the indigenous population is concentrated in southern Mexico, while the Afro-Mexican population, it is actually found in coastal regions. Now, the ethnicity of Mexico is actually predominantly mestizo. This refers to people of mixed indigenous and European heritage. Now, why? This is due to the history of colonization and conquest in Mexico, which began with the arrival of Spanish explorers in the early 16th century. Now, when the Spanish arrived, they quickly established a colonial presence in Mexico, subjugating and of course exploiting the indigenous populations that they encountered. Now, this led to a period of forced labor, religious conversions, and cultural assimilation, as well as a significant loss of life due to disease and violence that was brought by Spanish when they arrived in Mexico. Now, over time, the Spanish colonizer and their descendants intermarried with indigenous peoples, creating a mixed race population that came to be known as mestizo. Now, in addition to the mestizo population, there are also significant indigenous and Afro-Mexican populations. Now, indigenous peoples in Mexico, they're actually descendants of the original inhabitants of the region prior to the arrival of the Spanish colonizers. Now, when the Spanish before the Spanish arrived in the Mexico, there were actually indigenous people there. They also have their own cultures, traditions, and heritage, and of course practices. Now, the Afro-Mexican population in Mexico, they are actually descended from Africans who were brought to Mexico as slaves during the colonial period. Now, beginning in the 16th century, the Spanish brought enslaved Africans to Mexico to work in mines, sugar plantations, and other industries. So now let's move on to its language. Now, Spanish is actually the official language of Mexico, although there are also numerous indigenous languages spoken throughout the country. Now, each of these indigenous cultures, they develop their own unique language or dialect reflecting the diversity of their cultural traditions and geographic locations. Now, for Mexico, their official language is actually Spanish because they were actually colonized by the Spaniards during the 16th century. Now let's move on to its religion. Now, the majority of the population in Mexico is actually Roman Catholic, largely due to the influence of Spanish colonization in the 16th century. However, there is also a significant Protestant minority in Mexico, which has grown in recent decades for a number of reasons. Now, one reason for growth of Protestantism in Mexico is due to the increasing religious pluralism and diversity in the country. Now, as Mexico, we all know, as Mexico become more urbanized and connected to the global community, there has been a greater exposure to different religious traditions, including Protestantism. Additionally, there has been a growing dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church in Mexico, particularly in response to scandals involving the clergy, as well as concerns about the church's wealth and power. Now let's move on to its political system. Now, Mexico's political system as a federal presidential representative democratic republic with a multi-party system has its roots in the country's history and political development. Now, Mexico, they gained their independence from Spain in 1821, and over the course of the 19th century, the country they experienced a series of political upheavals and revolutions that was led to the establishment of federal system of government in 1917. Now, now, under this system, Mexico is divided into 31 states and one federal district, which is yung Mexico City. Now, each with its own government and legislature, and the national government with a president who is elected through a democratic process. Now, the multi party system in Mexico is the result of the country's effort to promote democratic governance and encourage political pluralism. Now, in the mid 20th century, Mexico was dominated by a single political party, which is the PIR, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which held power for over 70 years. However, beginning in the 1990s, there were significant political and economic changes in Mexico, including the establishment of free and fair elections, the liberaliz- the sorry, the liberalization of the economy, and the emergence of new political parties and movements. Now, overall, the Mexico's human geography is characterized by its rich cultural heritage, diverse ethnic and linguistic communities, and a significant economic and political challenges.
Good day, everyone. I am Trisha Ann May Gomez, and I am going to discuss about the economy of Latin America. So, before we discuss the economy of Mexico, I want you all to remember that there are two main economic challenges in Latin America. First is the gap between the rich and the poor. Second is the shift from agricultural society to industrial economy. So I hope from this information you'll be able to see the bigger picture of the economy of Latin America. So the economic system of Mexico is a developing mixed market economy. Mexico has a large, diversified, and strong economy with its oil sector, remittances from the United States, exports, agriculture, mining, tourism, and industrial activity playing the most significant roles in its growth. So, Mexico's economy includes large industry based on its oil reserves. If you can see in this map, the Venezuela and Mexico have the major oil reserves. And the oil from the Gulf Coast or Gulf of Mexico are being exported. Thus, its profits have helped to finance the development, especially in manufacturing industry. So, manufacturing, maquiladoras are factories in Mexico that are located in the northern part of the country near at the border of United States. And these factories in Mexico assemble imported materials into finished products that are then again being exported, and it is mostly to the United States. These products include electronic equipment, clothing, and furniture. So, if you remember about the NAFTA that was discussed by the North America group, Mexico is part of that NAFTA, and through the NAFTA, it created a huge zone of cooperation in terms of trading. Very important siya kasi the trade is expected to contribute to economic prosperity of the member nations, thus creating jobs for millions of people. So under NAFTA, import tariffs on the manufactured goods are being reduced. So, migration. Mexicans workers leave their country to travel to the United States in search of work. So the continuous growth of their population kay nakaproblema siya sa economic prosperity ng mga people, which means yung mga economic opportunities is very not that visible in their country. That's why these workers chose to migrate or work to other countries, specifically in United States. And if you remember kanina, di ba, the remittances from the United States, and this is the cause of migration. And oftentimes, after a year or two na nag-work sila sa United States, bumabalik rin naman sila sa Mexico with their savings para ma-improve yung living conditions ng family nila. And if you look at the the picture over here, kay nag-decrease siya noong 2019, which means visible yung kanilang shift from the industrial economy kasi now that they are in the industrial economy, may mga job opportunities na open for the people. Next is education. Education will become even more important as Mexico becomes more industrialized. So now, di ba, remember, the goal of Latin America is to shift into industrial economy. So the need of education is really kanang kailangan jud siya kay if you are the owner of this manufacturing factories, kay dawaton daay nimo ang mga mag-apply na uneducated or kanang wala sila skills towards the job hiring. So, di ba, pilion dyan to nimo katong na experience towards that job and katong na ay mga skills towards that job. And Mexico will have to invest in education to provide a better life for its young citizen. And if remember no sa discussion sa macroeconomics that education is a long long-term investment by our government. So, yung kita or kanang expected na result from this investment is matagal pa. And
And now let's move on to Central America and the Caribbean. Now let's first talk about Central America. Now, and okay, its population. Now, the seven countries that make up Central America is actually Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. Now, the region is actually predominantly rural, while Mexico kanina it is actually predominantly urban, while in Central America it is actually predominantly rural, with about 60% of the population living in rural areas. Now, these are actually some of the total population of the seven countries in Central America. As you can see, Mexico is actually the first one. And now let's move on to its ethnicity. Now, Central America is actually a home to a diverse mix of ethnic groups, including indigenous people, Afro Caribbeans, and Mestizo. Now, each country has its own unique ethnic makeup, with indigenous populations being most prominent in Guatemala and Honduras, and Afro Caribbeans being most prominent in Belize and Costa Rica. Now, Afro Caribbeans in Central America, they have a unique history that can be traced back to the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and migration. Now, during the colonial period, European powers such as Spain, Britain, and France established colonies in the Caribbean region, and they brought millions of Africans to the region as slaves to work on sugar, coffee, and tobacco plantations. Now, many of these Africans were transported to the Caribbean from West and Central Africa, and they brought with them their cultural traditions, languages, and religions. Now, as a result of the slave trade, there were significant African diasporic communities throughout the Caribbean region, including in countries such as Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Bahamas. Now, over time, some members of these communities migrated to Central America either voluntarily or as a result of forced labor. Now, one notable example of Afro-Caribbean migration to Central America is the construction of the Panama Canal in the early 20th century. There were actually thousands of workers, many of whom were Afro-Caribbean, were brought to Panama to work on the canal, and some remain in the region after its completion. Now let's move on to its language. Now, Spanish is actually the most commonly spoken language in Central America, although several indigenous languages are also spoken throughout the region, including Maya and Garifuna. Now, despite the efforts of the Spanish to impose their language and culture, many indigenous groups managed to maintain their language and culture. Why? Was partly due to the region's geography, which made it difficult for the Spanish to fully colonize and control the area. Now, over time, these indigenous populations of Central America have been able to assert their cultural and linguistic identity, and this has led to the preservation and revitalization of many indigenous languages. Now, let's move on to its religion. Now, Roman Catholicism is the dominant religion in Central America, although there is also a significant Protestant minority. Now, the dominance of Roman Catholicism in Central America can be traced back to the region's colonial history. When the Spanish arrived in the region in the 16th century, as what I have said earlier, they brought with them the Catholic faith, which they used as a tool to control and colonize the indigenous populations. Now, over time, Catholicism became deeply entrenched in Central American culture and society, and it remains the dominant religion in the region today. However, there has been a significant growth of Protestantism in Central America in recent years. Now, there are several reasons for this growth. One factor is the historical legacy of Protestant missionary activity on the region, which began in the late 19th century. Now, Protestant missionaries established schools, hospitals, and other social services, which helped to spread the Protestant faith among the local population. Now, another factor is the role of Protestantism as a vehicle for social and political change. Now, in many cases, Protestant churches have been at the forefront of social and political movements in Central America. They advocate for human rights, social justice, and political reform. Now, additionally, the growth of Protestantism can be they call this one can be attributed to demographic changes in the region, including its urbanization, migration, and globalization. Now, these changes have created new opportunities for religious expression and also have contributed to the diversification of the religious landscape in Central America. Now, let's move on to its political system. Now, Central America is actually uh, made up of seven independent countries, and each with its own unique political system. Now, these all seven countries are presidential representative democratic republics, although there are significant differences in terms of political stability and human rights. Now, let's go back to the seven countries here. Ayan. So, as what I've said earlier, these seven countries have different kinds of political system. They have these. I'm sorry. Now, as what I have said earlier, these countries are actually presidential representative democratic republics. But although there are significant differences in terms of political stability and human rights, now the significant differences in terms of political stability and human rights among the seven countries of Central America can be attributed to a combination of factors, including the historical, social, economic, and of course, political factors. Now, one of the key factors is the legacy of colonialism and imperialism in the region. Now, the countries of Central America, they were actually colonized by European powers, primarily Spain, and this history has had a profound impact on their development. The legacy of colonialism has left a mark on the region in terms of social and economic inequality, political instability, and corruption, which can contribute to human rights abuses. Now, additionally, each country has its own unique history and political culture, which can affect its political stability and human rights record. For example, countries like Costa Rica, they have their long tradition of democratic governance and respect for human rights, while others, like Honduras, have experienced political instability and authoritarian rule. Now, economic factors, they also played a significant role in political stability and human rights. Poverty and inequality are actually pervasive issues in many Central American countries, which can lead to social unrest and political instability. Now, moreover, economic inequalities can also exacerbate corruption as individuals and groups seeks to gain or maintain power through illegal means. Now, political factors such as the quality of governance, the strength of institutions, and the level of corruption, they also contribute to differences in political instability and human rights. Now, weak or corrupt institutions can undermine the rule of law and create an environment where human rights abuses can occur with impunity. Now, that's actually the political system of the Central America. Okay, so we're done with the Central America. Now let's move on to the Caribbean. Ayan. So, ayan, its population. Now, the Caribbean is actually made up of more than 25 islands, nations, and territories with a combined population of around 44 million people. The region is actually predominantly urban, with more than 70% of the population living in urban areas. So, ayan. And as you can see here, this is actually the countries in Caribbean with its population. And the first one is actually Haiti, following with Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and a lot more. So now let's move on to its ethnicity. Ayan. So the Caribbean is actually known for its diversity of ethnic groups, including the Afro-Caribbeans, Indo-Caribbeans, and European descended population. Now, the largest Afro-Caribbean populations, they're actually found in countries such as Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad, and Tobago, while Indo-Caribbeans are most prominent in countries like Guyana and Suriname. Now, the Caribbean has a rich history of colonization, slavery, and migration, which has contributed to the diverse ethnic groups that are present in the region today. Now, the first inhabitants of the Caribbean were the indigenous Amerindian population, who had their own distinct cultures and languages. However, with the arrival of the European explorers in the late 15th century, the region was colonized by various European powers, including Spain, France, Britain, and the Netherlands. Now, these European powers brought with them their own populations, cultures, and languages, which become part of the mix of people in the Caribbean. Now, slavery was also a major factor in the development of the Caribbean's ethnic diversity. Beginning in the 16th century, millions of Africans, as what I have said earlier, were forcibly brought to the Caribbean as slaves to work on plantation. Now, this led to the emergence of Afro-Caribbean population, who brought with them their own cultures, religions, and languages, which have had a lasting impact on the region. Now, another significant factor in the development of the Caribbean's ethnic diversity was indentured labor migration. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people from India were brought to the Caribbean as indentured laborers to work on sugar plantations. Now, this led to the emergence of Indo-Caribbean population who brought with them their own cultures, languages, and as well as religions. And now let's move on to its language. Ayan. So, English, Spanish, French, and Dutch are all spoken in the Caribbean, depending on the country. Additionally, there are numerous Creole languages that have developed in the region, including Jamaican, I don't know how to pronounce this one, but I think it's Patois, Patois, I don't know, Haitian Creole. Ayan. So, the Caribbean is a linguistically diverse region with several official and non-official languages spoken depending on the country. Now, English is the most widely spoken language in the Caribbean, spoken in countries such as Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Bahamas, and many others. Now, this is due to the historical influence of British colonization in the region. Spanish is also widely spoken in the Caribbean, with countries like Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico having Spanish as their official language. This is due to the historical influence of Spanish colonization in the region. Also, French is spoken in some Caribbean countries, including Haiti and Martinique, which are former French colonies. Dutch is also spoken in the Caribbean, which countries such as Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire having Dutch as their official language. Now, in addition to these official language, there are numerous Creole languages that have developed in the Caribbean. Creole languages are typically based on a mixture of European languages such as English, Spanish, French, and Dutch, and African languages. And they have evolved over time through contact between different communities. Examples of Creole languages in the Caribbean include Jamaican, Haitian Creole, and Antillean Creole. Now let's move on to its religion. Ayan. So the dominant religion in the Caribbean is Christianity, with Roman Catholicism and various Protestant denominations being the most commonly practiced. However, there are also significant populations of Hindus and Muslims, particularly in countries such as Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. Now, Christianity is actually the dominant religion in the Caribbean, with Roman Catholicism and various Protestant denominations being the most commonly practiced. Now, this is due to the historical influence of European colonization in the region, which brought with it Christianity and missionaries who spread the religion among the indigenous populations. However, there are also significant populations of Hindus and Muslims in the Caribbean, particularly in countries such as Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. Now, these populations, they are largely a result of indentured labor migration in the 19th century, which brought people from India and other parts of South Asia to work on plantations in the Caribbean. Now, many of these migrants brought their own religions with them, including Hinduism and Islam. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, approximately one third of the population is Hindu, with religion having significant presence in the country's cultural and social life. Now let's move on to its political system. Yeah. Now, um, political system, the Caribbean is actually made up of mix of independent countries, overseas territories, and also ano nga yun? Dependencies, each with its own unique and political system. Now, most countries in the region are parliamentary democracies, with a prime minister serving as a head of government. However, there are also a few countries, such as Cuba and the Dominican Republic, that are presidential representative democratic republics. Now, the Caribbean is actually a diverse region with a mix of independent countries, overseas territories, and dependencies, each with its own unique political system. Now, most countries in the Caribbean are actually parliamentary democracies with a prime minister serving as a head of government. This means that the government is accountable to the parliament, which is made up of elected representatives. Example of parliamentary democracies in the Caribbean include Jamaica, Trinidad Tobago, and Barbados. However, there are also a few countries in the Caribbean that are presidential representative democratic republics, where the president served as both the head of state and the head of government. Examples of these type of countries include Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Now, in addition to this political system, there are also some variations in terms of political stability and human rights across the region. Now, some countries have a long history of stable democratic governance, while others have experienced political turmoil and instability. Similarly, there are differences in terms of the protection of human rights, with some countries being known for their strong protections for civil liberties, while others have been criticized for human rights abuses.
So now we're going to discuss about the economy of Central America and the Caribbean. So, di ba kanina I said na the Latin America is shifting from agricultural society to industrialized economy. So they have these two techniques of in their agriculture. First is the slash and burn, and next is terraced farming. So this slash and burn, yung mga walang sariling land, naghahanap sila ng land na walang nagsisettle, and then yung mga puno and mga grasses there kay pinuputol nila. And then after that, kay ginasunog nila para ma-clear good ang land, and then pag ma-clear na ang land, kay dito na sila mag-settle and mag-cultivate sa ilahang crops. Pero problema ana kay since continuous man ang ilahang pag-crops kanang dili gud makapahuway ang soil, kay it's either mawala ng nutrients or kanang infertile na ang land, which means kaning mga farmers kay mangita na po na sila lain na yuta para ilahang ano putlan tapos sunugon tapos dito na pod so it become a cycle, which is very dangerous siya sa ating environment, no? So next is the terraced farming. So this terraced farming, kay familiar na I think mo ana kay di ba we also have that here in the Philippines, which is the Banawe rice terraces. And this terrace farming is done in the edge part of their ano no kanang it's either sa mountain kanang hillside, yes, dara na nila ilang ginataniman, and then that's it no kanang ilahang two techniques. So now farming. Sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean provide the region's largest export crop. Other important export crops are bananas, citrus, fruits, coffee, and spices. So, in Central America, most of the people there are living on farms and they are working in the plantation. However, these plantations no kay gamay ang ilahang pasweldo, which is dito na pumapasok yung push and pull factors in urbanization. First is the push factor. These are the factors that kanang naga naga-push sa people na mag-live sa rural areas, like ng poor wages, kana poor ang education. Ayon. And next is the pull factor, which pull the people towards cities, like ano na ang cities has a better education, like may mga economic opportunities, mga ganon. And the fact that these natural resources or these crops were exported are not used locally left the region economically weakened. Kasi, di ba, kahit na-reach sila in natural resources, bakit bakit mayroong gap pa rin between the rich and poor? It is because yung mga natural resources or their crops are focused more on exports, which is yung mayaman lang is yung may-ari, di ba? Next is trading. Trade is important because of the Panama Canal, which cuts through the land bridge and connects the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So, the Panama is called the crossroad of world trade. And ang nagpagawa nito is the United States kasi before the Panama Canal was built, yung shipping or yung pagtransport ng goods from east to west ng North America or west to east ng North America is umiikot pa sila sa South America from the northern part ng South America hanggang sa southern, tapos paikot na naman, like it cost a lot in their travel. Kaya ayon, when the US planned to build the Panama Canal, at first the government, I think in the Panama is i-decline nila, but then soon after kay ayun na agree na kasi ayun. Next is tourism. So the music is one of the factors that very sa tourism, no, like nag-help talaga na mag prosper, because of this genre. First is reggae and calypso music that was started in the Caribbean, and ito na yung pag-urbanize sa mga people, like the people in the rural areas move to the cities because of this economic opportunity, kasi 'di ba in tourism maraming opportunities na mau-open, maraming mga new hotels, restaurants na mag-open, so they need workers on that, 'di ba? Hindi naman mag-work ng own yung hotel and restaurant na walang tao, 'di ba? So yes, so this resulted na yung pag pag-grow ng population sa Caribbean, which ayun na nag-effect na ng nag-effect na siya negatively, which is the high unemployment, especially among the young. Because yun nga yung sabi ko na mga people sa rural areas migrate to the urban cities. Pero ang problema doon, hindi sila skilled. They lack job skills, which is nagtanggong na sila dito sa sa urban cities. Like dito na lang sila nagstay kahit ano wala man sila nadawat sa ilang mga gipang-applyan. So ayun. Nag-end nag-end up they end up living in slums. Ayun. So, some of those people no na hindi natanggap sa kanilang trabaho, they choose to be part with this economic activities na not regulated or protected by the state. And it includes jobs such as street vending, shining shoes, and a variety of other activities and services that provide people with a small income. If i-connect natin dito sa Pilipinas, no? For me I haven't seen na mangbabalot or ano tawag ba niyan, mangtataho na may business permit, no? So, it's lang na wala silang connected or wala silang link towards the government. Hindi sila protektado nun. And then, in this part no kay nang dili talaga sure ang kanilang prosperity in terms of economic kasi nga their these activities are provide lang ng small income.
Since we are done with the Central America and the Caribbean, now let's move on to the Spanish speaking South America. Spanish speaking South America is actually a diverse region of Latin America that is home to a variety of cultures, ethnicities, languages, and economic systems. Is that really true? Let's discuss it. Okay, first let's tackle about its population. Now, Spanish speaking South America is home to actually 400 million people, around 400 million people, making it the second most populous region in Latin America after Brazil. Now, the region is predominantly urban, with the majority of the population living in cities like Lima and Santiago. As you can see here, these are actually countries in South America. First, with its population, the first is actually Brazil, followed by Colombia, Argentina, and others. Now, the Spanish speaking South America is actually the second most populous region in Latin America after Brazil. Now, the region is also predominantly urban, with the majority of the population. Okay, so this trend towards urbanization in South America is largely due to factors such as economic development, industrialization, and the availability of employment opportunities in urban areas. Now, in addition, rural to urban migration has also played a significant role in the growth of cities in the region, with many people moving from rural areas to urban centers in search of better economic opportunities and a higher standard of living. Now, despite the predominance of urban areas in South America, there are still significant rural plantations in many parts of the region, particularly in countries such as Bolivia, Paraguay, and Peru. Now, these rural populations often face challenges such as limited access to healthcare and education, as well as economic and social marginalization. Now let's move on to its ethnicity. Now, the Spanish speaking South America is diverse, with various indigenous European and African ethnic groups. Now, Afro Latinx people are actually are a present group in Spanish speaking South America. They're actually the present ethnic group in Spanish speaking South America due to the historical transatlantic slave trade, which brought which brought millions of Africans to the regions as slaves. Now, during the colonial period, European powers such as Spain and Portugal, they established slave-based economies in various parts of the region, including Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Now, as a result of this history, many Afro-Latinx people in South America are descendants of enslaved Africans who were brought to the region during the colonial period. Now, these population have since developed unique cultural and linguistic traditions, which are often a blend of African, indigenous, and European influences. Now, let's move on to its language. Ayan. Now, Spanish is actually the dominant language throughout the Spanish speaking South America, although there are also numerous indigenous languages spoken in the region, particularly in Bolivia and Peru. Now, Spanish became the dominant language in South America during the colonial period when Spain established its control over time over much of the continent. Now, Spanish was introduced as the language of the ruling class and the Catholic Church, and it gradually spread throughout the population as a result of colonial policies that encouraged the adoption of Spanish and discouraged the use of indigenous languages. Now, over time, Spanish became the primary language of communication, trade, and administration throughout much of South America. Now, but despite the dominance of Spanish, indigenous language have persisted in many regions of South America. This is due in part to the fact that indigenous communities have maintained their distinct cultural and linguistic identities despite centuries of colonial rule and assimilation efforts. Now, in addition, many indigenous languages, they have continued to be used as a means of communication within indigenous communities and have been passed down from generation to generation. Now, the reason for the large number of indigenous languages spoken in Bolivia and Peru is due to the long history of indigenous cultures that have inhabited in these regions for thousands of years. Before the arrival of Spanish in the 16th century, there were many different indigenous groups with distinct languages, cultures, and traditions. Now, these indigenous groups were able to maintain their languages and their way of life in spite of colonialism and the dominant influence of Spanish. Now, additionally, the rugged terrain and geographic isolation of the Andes Mountains made it difficult for the Spanish to establish control over all areas. What I said earlier, it's because of the region's geography. The Spanish can actually take full account of all the regions because of its geography. Now, because of the rugged terrain and geographic isolation of the Andes Mountains, it made it difficult for the Spanish to actually establish control over all areas, allowing some indigenous communities to preserve their languages and cultures. Today, many indigenous languages are still spoken in these regions and are recognized as official languages alongside Spanish. Now let's move on to its religion. Ayan. So, the majority of the population in Spanish-speaking South America is Roman Catholic, although there is also significant Protestant minority, particularly in countries such as Colombia and Ecuador. Now, the majority of the population in Spanish-speaking South America is Roman Catholic because of the region's history of colonization and evangelization by Catholic missionaries. When the Spanish arrived in South America in the 16th century, they brought with them Catholicism as a dominant religion. Now, the Catholic Church, they played a significant role in the colonization and conversion of the indigenous population to Christianity. Now, over time, Catholicism became deeply ingrained in the culture and identity of many South American countries, and it remains the dominant religion to this day. However, there has been a significant rise of Protestantism in some countries, particularly in Colombia and Ecuador. The reason for this are complex and multifaceted, but some possibly factors include Protestantism was introduced to Colombia and Ecuador in the late 19th century through the efforts of foreign missionaries. These missionaries were primarily from North America, and Europe. And they established Protestant churches in urban and rural areas. Over time, these churches gained followers and established themselves as an alternative to the dominant Catholic Church. Now, in the mid 20th century, there were significant social and political changes in Colombia and Ecuador, which created a more favorable environment for the growth of Protestantism. For example, in Colombia, there was a rise in evangelical Protestantism in the 1950s and 1960s, which was associated with a conservative political movement. Now, in Ecuador, Protestantism grew in the 1980s and 1990s, partly as a response to political instability and economic hardship. Yeah. Now let's move on to political system. The political system of Spanish-speaking South America are diverse. Now, with a mix of presidential, parliamentary, and hybrid system. And most countries in the region are democratic republics, although there are some exceptions, such as Venezuela. Now, the political systems of Spanish speaking South America are diverse because of the region's history of colonization, independence, and political development. Each country in the region has its own unique political and cultural context that has shaped its political system. Now, there are actually some key factors that have contributed to this diversity. First, colonial legacy. We all know that the Spanish colonial period, they left a lasting legacy on the region's political institutions and tradition. Now, some countries in the region, such as Argentina and Uruguay, inherited a strong tradition of parliamentary democracy from their European colonial powers, while others, such as Mexico and Peru, they developed more centralized presidential system. Next is the political instability. Many countries in the region, they have experienced political instability and authoritarian rule at various points in their history. This has led to experimentation with different political systems, including hybrid systems that combine elements of presidential and parliamentary systems. Next is the economic and social factors. The region's economic and social conditions have also influenced its political system. In some countries, such as Venezuela, the rise of populism and the concentration of power in the executive branch has been driven by economic inequality and social unrest. Next is the international influence. Now, international influences, including the spread of democracy and the influence of foreign powers, have also shaped the region's political system. For example, the United States has played a significant role in the region's politics, including supporting democratic transitions and promoting free trade agreements. Overall, the human geography of Spanish speaking South America is actually marked by a diverse population, a range of economic system and political structures, and significant regional variations in cultures and language.
So now we're going to discuss about the economy of South America. And this is the map of their natural resources, specifically in their agriculture. So if you see here, no, dito na part, this is where the Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, and nakita nyo dito na they grow crops. This, ito na symbol, no, yan, sugarcane. And specifically again, they export the crops. And here, the Colombia and Venezuela, this part is ano na rin for oil reserves. Yeah. They are the great asset in the economy. And the west is Peru. This part, they are in the fishing industry. And in Ecuador, the upper part of the Peru dito is shrimp. So sa Peru, fishing, sa Ecuador, shrimp. And then sa Bolivia, here, ano, they have this deposits of tin, zinc, and copper. And in Chile, this linya, ayan, this is Chile. Um, they have this huge deposits of copper, which also again export being exported. Next is here, Argentina. They have this grain and livestock on its vast pampas. This pampas again is the low grasslands. Ayan. Next is Uruguay. Dito, they have they prosper in their agricultural country, and they are into major farming in may grazing areas dito sila, which is also part of the Pampas. Next is Paraguay dito. They also export their crops such as soybeans, cotton, and animal hides. Ano. Next is yan, Mercosur. It's the union of countries, specifically an economic union. Um, Parang same siya sa NAFTA. It's just that Mercosur is in the South America, that they are into markets. And from the word Mercosur, no, which is formed from the Spanish phrase Mercado Común del Sur, which means Southern Common Market. So, di ba kanina, we saw in the map the wide and the diverse natural resources, the variety of products, and because of this Mercosur, it become medium to access numerous natural resources, and it is very attractive because of their union in terms of trading. Next is literacy in South America, which is in education. So most of the countries in this region show high rates of education and literacy. And if you can see here, pataas yung nila, yung growth. Ayan. From the elderly, adult, and then youth. This is their ranking. On 2020, the literacy rate. First is the Colombia, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and El Salvador. Because again, education helps for the industrialization. So through education, this ano, these countries are on their way for being industrialized. Kasi nga education is an investment.
Let's move on to Brazil. Now, Brazil is actually the largest country in Latin America, both in terms of geography and, of course, population. Its human geography is actually shaped by diverse mix of ethnicities, cultures, and economic system. Now, let's move on to its population. Now, Brazil actually has a population of 200 over 216 million people, making it the most populous country in South America and the fifth of most populous country in the world. Now, the population is actually predominantly urban, with more than 85% of the population living in cities. So, Brazil is actually known as a melting pot of ethnicities due to its diverse population that has been shaped by a complex history of colonization, immigration, and intermarriage. Now, this diversity is the result of a long and complex history that began with the arrival of indigenous people thousands of years ago, followed by colonization by the Portuguese in the 16th century, and the subsequent importation of African slaves to work on sugar plantations. In addition, there have been a significant waves of immigration from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Now, this mixture of different peoples and cultures have created a unique blend of customs, traditions, and beliefs that are reflected in Brazilian society today. Furthermore, Brazil ethnic diversity is reflected in its music, dance, and art. The samba, for instance, is a dance that originated in the Afro-Brazilian community and has since become an integral part of Brazilian culture. Now, despite its ethnic diversity, Brazil has also faced significant social and economic inequalities. Indigenous people and Afro-Brazilians have historically faced discrimination, poverty, and limited access to education and healthcare. In recent years, however, there have been efforts to address these inequalities and promote greater inclusion and diversity in Brazilian society. Now let's move on to its language. Now, Portuguese is actually the official language of Brazil because Portugal was the first European country to colonize Brazil in the 16th century. Now, the Portuguese language was introduced to the native population, and it gradually became the what do you call this one? The dominant language over time. Now, additionally, Brazil was a Portuguese colony for over 300 years until it gained its independence in 1822. And during this time, the Portuguese language became firmly established as the language of government, education, and culture. Now, today, Portuguese is actually spoken by virtually the entire population of Brazil, and it is the official language and the primary means of communication in the country. Portuguese is also an important language in the international community as it is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. And despite the dominance of Portuguese in Brazil, there are also numerous indigenous languages spoken throughout the country, particularly in remote areas of the Amazon rainforest. Brazil is actually home to a diverse range of indigenous cultures and languages, and many indigenous communities have been able to maintain their distinct languages and cultural practices despite centuries of colonization and cultural assimilation. And now let's move on to its religion. Ayan. So, Brazil is predominantly Roman Catholic with around 64.6 the population identifying as Catholic. However, there is also a growing Protestant population, particularly among evangelical Christians. Now, the um, predominant Roman Catholicism in Brazil can be traced back to the country's history of colonization by Portugal, which brought Catholicism in the region in the 16th century. Now, for nearly 3 centuries, the Portuguese colonial government imposed Catholicism on the indigenous population, and resulting in the widespread adoption of the religion. Now, additionally, during the 19th century, the Brazilian government worked to consolidate a national work addition balik Additionally, during the 19th century, the Brazilian government worked to consolidate a national identity, and Catholicism became a significant part of that effort. The Brazilian state was closely linked to the Catholic Church, and the church played a significant role in the country's social and political life. And this contributed to the growth of the Catholic Church and its continued dominance in Brazilian society. Now, however, in the 20th century, Brazil experienced a significant shift in its religious landscape. One factor contributing to this shift was the rise of Protestantism, particularly among evangelical Christians. Evangelicalism spread rapidly in Brazil in the latter half of the 20th century, partly due to the influence of American missionaries. Now, the growth of Protestantism in Brazil can also be attributed to several factors, including dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church, perceived elitism, and its association with the country's ruling class. Protestantism emphasis on a more personal relationship with God, as well as its focus on the Bible as the sole source of religious authority, has also been appealed to many Brazilians. Now, in recent decades, Brazil has seen a significant growth in the number of Pentecostal and charismatic churches, which emphasize a more experiential and emotional approach to worship. And this has contributed to the continued growth of Protestantism in the country. And lastly, let's move on to its political system. Now, Brazil is actually the federal presidential representative democratic republic, with the president serving as the head of the government and multi-party system. Now, the country has a history of political instability, including impeachment proceeding against two recent presidents. Now, um, Okay, balik to sa political. So, and lastly, let's move on to the political system of Brazil. Again, as you can see the screen, it is actually a federal presidential representative democratic republic with the president serving as head of government and multi-party system. Sorry for that. Okay, so Brazil's system of government was actually established in 1988 with the promulgation of the current constitution. Now, the country's founders chose a federal presidential representative democratic republic system with the president serving as the head of government and a multi-party system for a number of reasons. First, the federal system was chosen because Brazil is a large and diverse country, and they have many different regions and cultures. Now, a federal system allows for more localized and decision making and enables different regions to have a greater degree of autonomy. Second, the presidential system was chosen because it provides for a clear separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The president serves as the head of government and is responsible for implementing policies, while the legislative branch is responsible for making laws and representing the people. Finally, the multi-party system was chosen because it allows for a wide range of political views and ideas to be represented in government. And Brazil has a number of political parties representing different ideologies, and the multi-party system enables a greater diversity of voices to be heard. Overall, the human geography of Brazil is marked by diverse population, a range of economic system and political structures, and significant regional variations in cultures and language. The country's size and complexity make it a fascinating and challenging place to study and understand. That ends of my report. Thank you for listening. And after this, Trisha will also discuss the economics of the Brazil. Thank you.
Brazil is one of the most industrialized country in South America, and they have this largest steel plants, and they are also the leading maker of automobiles, since over half of the car use ano naman, ethanol, a fuel that comes from sugarcane. So again, the agriculture is connected with this, and this ethanol kasi is less expensive than the imported oil. So these power plants located along these rivers to produce electricity. Ayan, dito na part. May mga river dyan. Tapos, if you see here in the map, no, diverse yung mga kanilang natural resources. From the gold, hydroelectronic power, may nickel, is natural gas. Ayan. It's very diverse in terms of natural resources, which is mostly the products are again being exported. Next is migration. So despite the economic success, Brazil remains a country with a vast gap between the rich and the poor. Kaya nga, because of pirmi sila naga-export. So, ang money, ang kita, kay naragyapon sa may-ari ng factories and companies in that. So, increasing urbanization is one of the result of attempts by many Brazilians to improve their lives by seeking jobs in the cities. Ayan, from rural areas to the urban areas. The internal migration that is happening there. Pero problema again, overpopulated na naman sa urban. So again, yung mga tao, naglilive na sila sa slums. Again, because of kakulangan of skills. Papasok na naman yung education, di ba? So everything is really connected. Next is from carnival to martial arts. So, carnival, the Brazil is the most colorful feast day in Brazil. And in Rio de Janeiro is again the leaders in important cultural activities and institutions. These people with costumes no kay they ride in these floats and they have music from music of the samba, a Brazilian dance with African influence. And this picture over here, no, this is an example of capoeira. Yes, it is an martial art and dance that developed in Brazil from African origins. And Angoleans who were taken to Brazil by the Portuguese brought this martial art and dance with them. And if i-connect natin siya dun sa migration, since um, urban areas are concentrated with tourism, and specifically here in Rio, tourism is really important in on this city no kasi because of their cultural activities which make ano economic activities that is happening here na rin naman. And then it's because dahil nga 'di ba nag-move yung mga people from the rural areas to urban areas, kanang nagtaas na ulit yung population, yung iba naman walang trabaho. So these people kanang naano na lang sila, na push sila na ano mag-make of dangerous good like mga bad na gawain. Tapos kanang mag mag drug abuse. So because of that no kanang the very problem on their economy, population, agre-result ng iba't ibang problema sa kanilang lugar. So ayan. However, the government naman is really making their part now to address these concerns. So next will be the summary of the economy in the Latin America. Mexico, that is oil and manufacturing, migration and education. Central America, farming, trade, tourism and informal economy. And the Spanish-speaking South American, the trade and literacy. And Brazil, the industrial power and internal migration. So I hope na-connect ninyo katong two major economic challenges ng Latin America from this chunking in sub-regions in the sub-regions of Latin America. So again, the gap between the rich and poor, and then the shift from agricultural to industrial economy.
We discussed the environmental issues, climate in Latin America and the Caribbean region. There are four learning outlines. First, regional climate and key indicators, which is discussed the temperature, precipitation, and glaciers. Second, extreme events, heavy precipitation, drought, heat waves. It also highlights the impacts of changing climate on agriculture and food security, migration displacements, and deforestation. And last is enhancing climate resilience and adaptations policies. So we discussed regional climate and key indicators. First one is temperature. The average rate of temperature increase in the region was 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade between 1991 and 2021 compared to 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade between 1961 and 1990. So makita nato diri sa graph ang ilahang pagtaas sa temperature per decade. So So the annual temperature anomaly relative to 1981 to 2010, ang Caribbean is above normal temperature in the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and the small Caribbean islands, while ang South America is above normal temperature prevailed over the entire continent with positive 1 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius observed in parts of northeast and central Brazil, Colombia, central Chile, central and southern Argentina. Then below average in some parts na ang Jamaica is nasa 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then ang Dominican Republic ay nasa 2 or 1.5 degrees Celsius. While in South America, makikita natin na ang Brazil ay nasa 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. Then, ang Chile is nasa 0.5 to 1 degrees Celsius. Then, ang Argentina is nasa 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Despite being cooler than recent years due to the influence of a moderate La Nina, temperature continued to rise in Latin America and Caribbean. So, the warming trend continued in 2021 in Latin America and the Caribbean region. So next is precipitation. Large contrasts were observed in a rainfall spatial distribution. Some rainfall patterns were in line with the typical rainfall patterns associated with La Nina conditions. So, the annual precipitation anomaly is that ang Caribbean is below normal rainfall predominated, while South America is above normal in Colombia, Amazonia, Suriname, and Guyana, and below normal in most of Chile, southwestern Andes of Peru, then the northeast Brazil. Makikita natin sa map, ang Caribbean is below normal talaga sila, then ang South America din below ang most of Chile, southern region of Andes, Peru. Precipitations occurs when water vapor in the atmosphere condenses into liquid or solid form and falls to the ground. This process is a natural part of the water cycle where water evaporates from bodies of water or plants, then rises into the atmosphere and then falls back to the earth as precipitation. The last one is glaciers. Glaciers across the region had been losing mass over the past decades, and loss rates are among the highest globally. So, as precipitation pattern change and temperature rises, glaciers in Latin America have been losing mass. So, this has tremendous impact on the region as glaciers are important freshwater sources for water consumptions, power generations, agriculture, and ecosystem conservation. So, for better understanding the glacial evolution, the region is divided into 3 zones. So, the tropic, the dry Andes, and the central Andes. So, first is tropical Andes. Tropical Andes is a region in South America that expands across several countries, including Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. So it is characterized by its high-altitude mountain ranges, which run parallel to the Pacific coast and contain some of the world's highest peaks, such as Peru and Huascaran in Peru and Aconcagua in Argentina. So the region is known for its rich biodiversity with a vast array of plant and animal species found nowhere else in the world. So it also home to numerous indigenous communities, each with their own unique cultures and traditions. So the tropical Andes are of great ecological and cultural significance and currently facing numerous challenges, including deforestation, climate change, and economic development pressures. So the evolution of annual mass balance in tropical Andes in 1990 to 2021 is that 0.97 meter water equivalent per year, and so this corresponds to approximately a 30 to 50% loss of their area since the 1980s. So ice mass loss has increased the risk of water scarcity for the Andean population and ecosystems. Last is Central Andes. So, glaciers mass balance had a negative trend to 0.56 meter water equivalent per year from 1976 to 2021. So, ang Central Andes is also facing numerous environmental challenges, same as dry Andes and tropical Andes. But Here are the mining activities, impacts of the climate change which threaten the fragile ecosystem and the communities that rely on it. So example ani ang Piloto Este ang Icharon North. Of course, glaciers play an important role in shaping the landscape and supporting various ecosystems, but they are also vulnerable to climate change and human activities, and their impacts can be far-reaching. One of these are ecosystems. Glacier supports a unique ecosystem with several plant and animal species adapted to the extreme conditions. As glaciers melt, this can lead to the loss of habitats and biodiversity. While in water supplies, of course, glaciers are one important source of fresh water, providing water for human consumption, agriculture, and hydropower. So also, when glaciers melt due to the climate change, this can lead to water scarcity in some regions, so that the risk of water scarcity for the Andean populations and ecosystem has increased. Next is extreme events. First in extreme events is heavy precipitation and flooding. So in Haiti on 16 and 17 in August, heavy rain and strong wind associated with tropical storm winds affected the country during the rescue efforts that followed the 7.2 magnitude earthquake on August 14. Then the Rio Negro at Manaus reached the highest water levels in 102 years of records in 2021. So then in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, by end of August, heavy rains led to floods and landslide in several. So extreme rainfall across the region led to hundreds of lives lost, tens of thousands of homes destroyed or damaged, and hundreds of thousands of people displaced. One of the reasons why there is heavy precipitations and flooding or may occur is that climate change. When the Earth's climate changing, there has been an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, so including heavy rainfall and flooding. So this is because warmer air can hold more moisture, leading to more intense rainstorms and increased likelihood of floodings. Also, one of these topography, the shape and features of the land can play a role in heavy precipitation and flooding. So, areas with steep slopes, narrow valleys, or low-lying areas are more susceptible to flooding. So, in addition, urbanization and development can alter natural drainage patterns, leading to increased flood risk. Second is drought. Drought affected several countries and regions in Latin America and Caribbean during 2021, including most of Mexico, parts of Central America and Caribbean, and parts of subtropical South America. So, in Paraná La Plata Basin, severe drought conditions in Paraná La Plata Basin in Brazil and Argentina considered the worst since 1944. So, many sectors including agriculture, inland water navigation, energy production, and water supply, as well as ecosystem. Like in Central Chile mega drought, the ongoing Central mega drought, which started in 2010, persisted in Central Chile, is the longest and most severe in at least 1,000 years, and putting Chile at the forefront of a regional water crisis. Drought can have various causes, including natural weather patterns, climate change, and human activities. So in climate change is also contributing to drought in many parts of the world. So rising temperature, changing weather patterns, and increased evaporation rates are also contributing to decrease in available water resources in many areas. Also, in human activities such as excessive water consumption, deforestation, and land usage changes can also contribute to drought conditions. Overuse of water resources can lead to depletion of water resources, while deforestation and land use changes can alter local weather patterns and reduce the amount of rainfall. Drought can also result from natural disasters such as your hurricanes, cyclones, or El Nino events. So these events can disrupt the normal weather patterns and cause a prolonged period of dry conditions. So overall, drought is a complex phenomenon that can have multiple causes, and it can have several impacts on both environment and human communities. And the last one of extreme event is heat waves and wildfires. Heat waves occurred in many countries of the Latin America and Caribbean regions, including Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Peru. Some temperature records, including all the times record, were reported. Heat waves are caused by a combination of meteorological and environmental factors. So the most common cause is the presence of high pressure system that traps hot air and prevent cooler air from entering a region. So this leads to an accumulation of heat in the atmosphere, which can cause temperatures to rise to dangerous levels. So other factors that contribute to heat waves include climate change, which can cause more frequent and intense heat waves, as well as urbanizations and the associated urban heat island effect, which can make cities significantly hotter than surrounding rural areas. So, in human activities, such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation, can also contribute to heat waves by releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which trap heat and contribute to global warming. So, overall, heat waves are complex phenomena that can be influenced by a variety of factors, both natural and human-made. So understanding this factor and their interaction is important for predicting and mitigating the impacts of heat waves on human health, agriculture, and the environment. Heat waves have significant impacts on South America, including here in human health, agriculture, and environment. So heat waves can lead to a range of health problems, including heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and dehydration. So, elderly people, children, and those with pre-existing health conditions are particularly vulnerable. In extreme cases, heat waves can lead to increased mortality rates. Also, in agriculture, have significant impacts on crops and livestock, leading to reduced yields and increased mortality rates. So, this can have significant impact on food security and economy. Wildfires occurred throughout South America during 2021. So, wildfires are caused by combinations of natural and human factors. Of course, natural causes of wildfires including lightning strikes, volcanic eruption, and etc. So, in human cause, wildfires can result from a variety of activities such as campfires, smoking, fireworks, sparks from equipment or vehicles. So, and many wildfires are caused by arsons, which is deliberately setting off the fires. And climate change has been also identified as a factor that is contributing to the increase in wildfires in many regions. Climate change can create drier and hotter conditions which make it easier for wildfires to start and spread quickly. So overall, the reasons of wildfire are complex and multifaceted. So, and preventing and managing wildfire requires a combination of strategies including fire prevention, education, early detections, and rapid response of measures. So wildfires are very significant problem in South America, particularly in countries such as Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. So the impacts of wildfires in South America can be severe and wide-reaching. So South America is home to some of the world's most biodiverse forests, including the Amazonian forest. Wildfire can cause significant damage to forests, destroying habitats and disrupting ecosystem, leading to a loss of biodiversity. Also, in the economic impacts of wildfires can be significant, particularly in areas where agriculture and forestry are key industries. So, wildfires can destroy crops, damage infrastructures, and impact tourism, leading to significant economic losses.
Good day everyone. So now I'm going to discuss the impact and risk enhancing climate resilience and adaptation policies in South America and the Caribbean region. So first here we have the deforestation. So in deforestation in Brazil, Amazon rainforest doubled compared to 2009 2009 to 2018 average, reaching its highest level since 2009. So as we can see in our presentation here na compare natin ito sa 2009, so malaking bahagi ng kanilang rainforest ang nawala. At compared to 2020, 22% more forest area was lost in 2021. So 2021 yung aming napili na data dahil ito na yung latest na aming nakita. So next is the causes of deforestation in Amazon rainforest. So ito yung mga factor kung bakit pinuputol nila ang kanilang mga puno. The first is may malaking contribution dito ay ang cattle ranches na 65 to 70% at sinusundan ng small scale subsistence agriculture so 20 to 25%, and large scale commercial agriculture 5 to 10%. And the next is the color purple, lagging illegal and legal 2 to 3%, and fire, mining, urbanization, road constructions, dam na may 1 to 2%. Next is the agriculture and food production, food security. So in South America, in the Parana, La Plata Basin, drought induced damage to agriculture, reduced crops production including of soybeans and corn, affecting global crops markets. In addition, below average rainfall between April and May 2021 in Haiti resulted in low agricultural production. Since late 2018, the number of Haitian people experiencing a high level of acute food insecurity has nearly doubled to about 4.3. So, dahil sa pagputol ng mga puno ay nakakaranas ang mga bansa doon sa South America at Caribbean region ng tagtuyo. So, itong tagtuyo na ito ay tinatawag na El Nino na tumatagal na 6 na buwan at mahigit pa. At naapektuhan ang kanilang mga pananim doon at nakakaranas sila ng high level of acute food insecurity. So ibig sabihin ay hindi naging sapat yung mga pangailangan nila na pagkain sa pangaraw-araw dahil sa kalamidad na ito. So ngayon ay isa ito sa kanilang mga naging problema doon sa mga bansang nasa sakupan ng South America at Caribbean region. Next is the displacement and climate-induced migration. So extreme climate events and slow onset climatic change influence human mobility patterns and induce population displacement throughout 2021 in LAC. So dahil sa mga sakunang nangyari sa mga bansa doon sa South America at Caribbean region ay napipilitang lisanin ng mga mamamayan ang kanilang dating trabaho, especially ang agrikultura, at lumilipat sila sa mga lugar sa ibang lugar upang maghanap doon ng trabaho. At ito ay nagiging problema doon sa lugar na kanilang nililipatan dahil sa biglaang pagtaas ng populasyon sa mga taong walang trabaho. At kasunod nito ang pagtaas ng kriminalidad sa isang lugar dahil ang mga ito ay pumapasok na lamang sa mga illegal na mga gawain upang matustusan ang kanilang mga pangangailangan. So ilan lamang ito sa mga naging impact ng climate change na nangyari sa mga bansang South America at Caribbean region. Next is enhancing climate resilience adaptation policies. So sa tulong ng United Nations ay bumuo ang mga bansang sakop ng South America at Caribbean region ng isang organisasyon na tinatawag na World Meteorological Organization. So ang layunin ng organisasyon na ito ay bigyang solusyon ng problema sa climate change. So ilan sa mga naging solusyon na organisasyong ito sa mga bansang sakop ng South America at Caribbean ay ang i-develop ang kanilang multi-hazard early warning system. So itong multi-hazard early warning system ay isang sistema na tumutulong sa napapanahong pagpapalabas ng babala at alerto para sa iba't ibang panganib tulad ng natural na sakuna, matinding pangyayari sa panahon at iba pang mga emerhensiya. So ito ang kanilang unang hakbang upang matugunan ang mga nangyayaring problema doon sa bansang nasa sakupan ng South America at Caribbean region. Next is the goal of this WMO or World Meteorological Organization. So ang kanilang mission is the early warning services must protect everyone within 5 years. So ito yung kanilang goal. And the United Nations Secretary General Gutierrez has tasked the World Meteorological Organization to lead the effort and present an action plan to achieve this goal. So to achieve this goal, kailangan nila ng mga plano at ang plano na ito is to build on existing WMO activities at partnership, including WMO Global Multi-Hazard Alert System, the Climate Risk and Early Warning System Initiative, and Global Framework for Climate Services, and Systematic Observation Financing Facility. So ito yung mga kinakailangan nila upang upang makamit nila ang goal na ito. So in conclusion, the problem of the climate change that occur in South America and Caribbean region is very alarming dahil sa patuloy na pagtaas ng temperatura sa kanilang klima ay maraming naapektuhan. At ito ay nagpapaalala sa atin na hindi malayong mangyari rin ito sa ating bansa kapag palagi nating inaabuso ang ating kalikasan. So lahat naman tayo ay gusto ang modernisasyon at nangarap na maging maunlad ang ating bansa. Ngunit ang pag-abuso sa paggamit ng ating kalikasan ay may kapalit na kapahamakan. So that's it, and thank you.